My name is Sally. I'm from the southern sea of, you guessed it, Texas. Ha! Isn't that funny? Now, today, we are going to talk about some very important things. So, I ask that you please put on your thinking caps and focus real hard so you can have the time of your life today. Would I rather sail across the ocean or hike through a jungle? What kind of a question is that? That sounds like a lot of work. I don't know if I want to do any of those things. But if I had to pick, I guess I would say hike across a jungle. But why? I don't know why. Maybe because, I don't know, I could sit down if I needed a break.
Okay guys, today's game time is going to be a little bit different. So, this week, Sally, who we just met a few minutes ago, is going to tell you some things about herself. And next week, you have to see if you can remember them correctly.
Alright, so getting back to my introduction, just going to tell you some things about myself. Now, the first thing, believe it or not, I actually hate polka dots. I know, it's so funny because my shirt is polka dotted, but I do not like polka dots. No, not at all. The second thing is that I wear cowboy boots everywhere I go. Now, you don't believe me, I know, but next week I'll bring my cowboy boots and I will show you what being from Texas is all about. Okay, now that's only 2 things, so I need to give you one more thing to remember. Okay, this one's kind of funny, but you see these clothespins over here? Well, I hate, and I mean that so much, I hate hanging up my clothes on the clothespin line outside. It's just a waste of my time, and I don't like to do it. Okay, that's 3 things. Can you remember that? I don't like polka dots, I wear cowboy boots, and I don't like doing laundry. That's 3 things. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
We've been learning all about Paul the last few weeks, and today we're going to talk some more about him and another adventure that he went on. Now, how many of you like roller coasters? Maybe you like the thrill of getting on them, the anticipation. I probably don't think anyone would like the part where you have to wait in the line for a long time. But maybe you like it when you get safely to the end of the ride. I know that's the part that I like. I think one reason we like roller coasters is because they aren't boring, right? Well, guess what? When God calls us to live with Him, He calls us to life that is more exciting than any kind of roller coaster ride. Now, our story for today is about Paul's exciting trip to Rome. So, like a roller coaster, he had his trip and it had some ups and some downs, and it had some surprising turns. So buckle up, make sure you're strapped into your roller coaster, and we're going to take a journey and we're going to learn all about Paul. Now, the trip starts with Paul in trouble in Jerusalem. People who didn't love Jesus had gotten him in trouble for really no good reason at all. But that wasn't enough for these people. They wanted to kill Paul, even though he hadn't done anything wrong except tell people about Jesus. They didn't get to hurt Paul though, because God helped Paul escape. When the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and he told Paul all about it. That very night, the commander sent Paul out of town. They went to Caesarea. The commander told him, in the middle of 470 Roman soldiers. That's a lot of soldiers to protect one man, don't you think? But God called Paul to life with him, and God protected Paul. When God calls us to life with him, did you know that he can protect us too? Once Paul was safely in Caesarea, he had to wait and wait and wait. I don't know about you, but sometimes I really hate waiting. Paul waited for, guess what? How long do you think? 2 years. Can you believe that? How old will you be in 2 years? What grade will you be in? That's a long, long time. But Paul did not waste his time. During those 2 years, he told governors and a king and a queen all about Jesus. So even though he was just kind of waiting around, he kept doing what God had called him to do. And it's the same thing God has called each of us to do, to tell people about Jesus, right? When God calls us to life with him, he gives us a mission to tell others about Jesus. Finally, the governor sent Paul to Rome. This is what Rome looks like now, but in Paul's time, it was the most wonderful, important city in the Roman Empire. It was like being sent to Washington, D.C., the big, important place. Paul and the soldiers guarding him boarded the ship. They sailed to the island of Crete. There they found a harbor to stay in for the winter. But the sailors wanted to stay in a different harbor, and Paul had spent a lot of time on ships on his missionary journeys, and he knew the ship should not move. He warned the men not to leave the harbor. He tried to use wisdom, but guess what? They didn't listen to him. So they left the safe harbor, and at first it seemed like Paul was wrong. A gentle south wind blew. But soon, a wind of hurricane force called the northeastern swept down from the island. What do you think happened? Yes, you got it. The winds blew the ship out onto the open sea in the middle of the terrible storm. Close your eyes and imagine. I know your eyes are open, so try it again. Close your eyes and imagine rain and lightning and thunder and scary winds and... Now imagine that whole storm for 2 whole weeks. The men on the ship were terrified that they would die. But they weren't going to die. Why? Paul prayed and God heard his prayer. God sent a special messenger to Paul. And it says in the Bible in Acts 27, verses 23 through 26. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. God will save the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God." Now that was wonderful news. Do you think the sailors and soldiers on that ship were glad that Paul loved and served God and heard him? I would think so. God speaks to his children just like Paul. He may not always send an angel, but if we listen to God's word, the Bible, and obey it, he will send us the answers we need. When God calls us to life with him, he calls us to hear his voice. So, did God keep his word? Of course he did. And after 2 weeks in that horrible storm, the ship got stuck on a sandbar near an island. And the ship broke in half. Can you imagine? It just broke in half in all those waves. But all the men on the ship, they made it safely to the shore. Everyone survived, just as God had promised. God always keeps his promises. Man, Paul's had an exciting trip so far. He's been arrested, hidden in the middle of an army, spent 2 years in jail, spoke to a king and a queen, and what else? Oh yeah, shipwrecked. Can you believe that? What else could happen now? Well, if we keep reading in Acts 28, verse 3 and 5, it says, Paul gathered a pile of brushwood and he put it on the fire. A viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and survived no ill effects. Wow, man, he's just having a crazy time, isn't he? But that's all that happened on the island. That was so cool. Paul also prayed for many people and God healed them, even though Paul was shipwrecked because someone had made the mistake of sailing out into the water and not staying in that safe harbor. Even though he was a prisoner on his way, and even though he was stuck on an island and he had been bitten by a snake, Paul still showed God's love for others. Paul obeyed God's call to live life with God. Now, after about 3 months, Paul finally sailed to Rome, the whole reason he left on this trip in the first place. And when he got there, he lived under arrest in a house and was guarded by soldiers while he waited for his trial. Paul couldn't go where he wanted to go, and he couldn't leave town until after his trial. He was kind of just stuck, you know? But that didn't stop Paul from doing God's work. He told people about Jesus and wrote letters that ended up becoming books of the Bible, like Philippians and Ephesians and Colossians. Paul understood something that we also have to understand, that when we live life with God, we always win. Paul wrote about this in his letter to the Romans. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Does that mean that nothing sad or scary will happen? No. Does that mean that nothing scary or sad will happen to us? No. Scary and sad things, they'll happen to everyone. People who live life with God and those who don't live life with God. But when we live life with God, He has promised to never leave us alone. Now, the best, most exciting life is the life we live when we answer God's call. And that brings us to our ponder point for the day.
God calls us to life with Him. Man, that's just so great. Woohoo!
Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. Acts 4:12.